Hello, you're listening to the Saluki Gamescast. This is episode 96 for Friday, November 1st, 2024. My name is Justin Young, and joining me as always are Alicia Utek and Mario Sanders. How are you guys doing?
Doing okay. I think for me, as the semester starts to come to a close this month, now that we're in November is going to be a particularly hectic month for me. And so it's like, oh no, we're actually here now. It felt like it was in the future, and now it's like, no, we're actually here. So
even just a week ago, right? Like November seemed forever into the future.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden, yeah, it's always this time of year where all of a sudden it hits. It always hits me like, oh, I didn't get my Halloween costume. It's too late, right? And you're like 2 weeks out from Halloween or something. And then as soon as that's over, you have to start thinking, at least teaching wise, like, okay, classes are starting to wrap up. And so you have to get final projects in and all of this. Mm-hmm. And then that also transitions into, oh no, we're headed into Thanksgiving break. That means I have to start doing Christmas shopping and get all of that done. And then it's finals, and it's just like a mad dash to the end.
It is, in fact, that time of the semester.
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing it for however
She's been waiting all semester to say that.
I've been doing it for however many years at this point through the master's program, and now as a PhD student. I don't know if I've ever figured out how to balance, okay, I've got to do all of this grading for final projects, but I've also got these papers that I have to write in like a way that's healthy.
Right.
And they get done.
That's a very difficult balance, right? While you're taking classes and also like working full time, whether it's teaching or you know some other job.
Yeah, being in my last year as a PhD student, same.
Oh, sure.
I've never figured it out, and I don't expect I ever will.
Yeah, well, I mean, just think you're almost done with coursework at least, so that will be a big relief, right? You won't have to stress and worry about that anymore.
I met with Craig, GP, who's my advisor, and next semester I will have my final class and starting dissertation credits.
Is that a single class that you'll have?
Yeah, so I'll just take one class. It's going to be an independent study because I need a methods class, one last methods class.
All right.
So, yeah.
Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's one of those things that I'm like, oh my God, I might like not do anything in terms of question writing for like the first couple of weeks and just feel like I really get a break here.
I think giving yourself a break is always a good idea. Allows your brain to sort of detox from all of the academia for at least a little bit. Yeah, so yesterday was Halloween. Did either of you do anything fun for Halloween? Or the time leading up to Halloween?
The only thing I really do for Halloween is, I say I do this every year. I do it most years. There was a special that aired on Cartoon Network a while back now. I couldn't even tell you how long ago it was, called Over the Garden Wall. It's an animated 10-episode little thing. So each episode's maybe like 10 to 15 minutes. But I usually watch that right around this time of year, and I watched it yesterday. But it's one I really enjoy, and so, yeah, that was good.
I feel like that's become a big tradition, I guess of like kids who grew up with that or something, like because this is the first year I've really seen lots of people on social media talking about it.
I think it's very possible. I know Frankie, who's also in our program, I had posted that that's what I was doing, and he messaged me saying, oh, we're doing that over at our apartment too. We're watching it. And so, yeah, I think that, like I said, it's probably about 10 years old. So, I didn't necessarily grow up watching it, but I think you're going to I think that's one that will be a pretty common tradition for people.
Yeah.
Because it takes place on Halloween, but I think right around this time of year, it's very like fall generic in many ways.
Yeah. Alicia?
Yeah, I dressed up for class yesterday, so I wore my giraffe costume to teach. And my students walked in, and one of my students walked in and just started laughing and went, "Of course."
But it's not Jeffrey the giraffe from Toys R Us, is it?
No, it's just a giraffe.
So a non-capitalist giraffe.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then I had my Harley Quinn costume because I'm in a performing comics class. So I was like, I cannot go to performing comics on Halloween and not dress as a comic book character.
Yeah, there are no giraffes in comics.
So you switch costumes.
Yeah, the giraffe costume is like a onesie kind of thing.
Similar to the Stitch one you were wearing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just wore the Harley Quinn dress and tights under it, and then just took off the giraffe for the performing comics class. And then tonight, I'm going with a group of friends to Rocky Horror, which they do over in Marion, about 20 minutes away. So that'll be fun. I wanted to go last night, but my friend DJ is a first grade teacher and was like, I cannot go at midnight and then be nice to first graders the next day. I was like, that's fair.
Yeah, so you go to that just about every year, right? The Rocky Horror Show?
Yeah, I missed it last year because I was in Chicago with my sister last year when they did it, but
Was that going to the Sonic concert?
yeah. Yeah, but I went my first 2 years and I'm going this year, so I'm looking forward to that. It should be good.
And how wild did they get at the Marion shows?
Not as wild as they could be.
I feel like bigger cities, right? Like
Yeah.
you expect it to be kind of a crazy experience. And so,
Yeah, it definitely, people do the costumes and all that, and of course you have the audience participation, but you also get a lot of people who, I promise I'm not being weird when I say this, because this is the term for people who don't know who've never seen Rocky Horror either live on stage or with a shadow cast. A lot of people are virgins, and so normally like bigger cities and that will do a whole thing for like, okay, if there's any virgins in the audience, they like bring them up on stage and embarrass them and all of that. And Marion doesn't do that. So like it's a fairly chill experience. But also it is really fun, like getting to be the person who knows everything. And then like having the people around you who don't know and them being like, what on earth? And you're like, look, this is Rocky Horror. This is what we do.
well, you've got your Rocky Horror shirt on.
I do.
But yeah, I think it would be weirder if like you didn't give the context, because then it would be like, well, there's a lot of people who show up at these shows who are virgins.
Yeah.
And it would be like, well, how do you know that, Alicia?
Yeah.
It's not something that people normally volunteer. You can't necessarily look at someone and tell.
Nope. You only get at Rocky Horror because they take lipstick and draw a big V on your forehead. But I know I was talking because I'm going with 4 other friends. 2 of them we go together every year, and then 2 of them, this is both of their first time going to Rocky Horror. And we were out playing trivia on Tuesday, and they said that they had never been. And I was like, oh my gosh, you guys are virgins? And they just both were like, what? I was like, oh no, you don't know. I promise I'm not like being weird. It's just what the term is for this event.
I mean, I think it's weird of a certain sort, right?
It's weird, but it's not me being weird. It's Rocky Horror and the general Rocky Horror enjoyers being weird.
I feel like this is what people in cults say. I promise I'm not weird. It's just what we do in the fellowship.
I mean, can we really say that Rocky Horror is not kind of cultish? I don't think we can say that. Probably it is.
So we're wrapping up Halloween, and then we're headed into election next week. And we should also note we are headed into, because we really don't want to talk about the election, that we're headed into Playing for Pets next week. So our big marathon stream event, which will be next Thursday and Friday.
For our listeners who've been around for a while, I will not be updating any controllers this time.
She can't say that with any sort of confidence.
Right. I don't believe that at all. I don't trust that.
That may be her
statement.
intention, but you have to tune in to see if it actually comes to be.
I'm just going to have one controller with the firmware out of date, and that's going to be the controller she gets.
Justin purposely like degrading the
I just want to watch her try not to. Like, she's just sitting there twitching the entire time.
Mario, can you see if you can figure out what's going on with this? Like, no. It's your controller. Figure it out.
I keep getting prompts, and I don't want to respond to them. But yeah, we'll be doing that at playingforpets.com, and you can watch along. You can donate. It's for a good cause, St. Francis Care Animal Shelter. We may have some special guests from St. Francis, and then we'll be doing like lots of cool things during the stream.
And it's a 2-day event, so tune in Thursday or Friday.
Right, and all three of us will be there. Christina will be there. Other people who have been on the podcast before will be there.
It's from 10 to 6, right?
10 to 6 each day. Yeah.
And where can people watch?
Playingforpets.com.
Okay. I didn't remember if because last time it was on like Twitter or something like that.
We stream it multiple places.
Okay.
But you can go to Playing, if you are listening to this and you don't know where those places are, you can just go to playingforpets.com and it'll be embedded there where you can watch it and everything. But yeah, it will be streamed on Twitch and YouTube and probably Facebook and maybe some other places as well. We try to get it out there as many places as possible because that gets more viewers and hopefully more donations. But yeah, just today I was preparing for that, and so there was a lot of going through games and figuring out which games would be playable, and maybe even picking up a few games with some ideas of like how this could be particularly fun to do something with. So I'm not going to mention what those are, but like there might have been some games picked specifically for certain people to reward them or torment them, whichever.
There's like nothing sinister about the way that you're like being
No,
shady here.
not at all.
So
I'm sure fun has no like extra context of who it's going to be fun for.
Yeah.
The person playing? Probably not.
I'm not concerned at all.
Look, have I ever led you astray with anything? Don't answer that.
May I remind you of the Nickelodeon version of Super Smash Brothers? That was...
I had no idea about that game until we started playing. That was a game that existed, and like, why don't we try this? And I mean, it was not a great game.
It's a horrible game. Still not as bad as the Avatar Quest for Balance game, but you didn't lead us astray on that. That was just the whole darn internet.
There's an Avatar Quest for Balance game?
Is that a fighting game?
No, it's a Last Airbender. Really? You guys didn't see about this?
No.
Oh my gosh, this was like 7 months ago now or something, and it's absolutely, it's soulless. It's terrible. The gameplay is boring.
I feel like that's one of those things that's really interesting. Like, as big as the fandom is for that, they've never had a really good Avatar game.
No,
like,
they haven't.
They had that Xbox 360 one that everyone played because you could get all the achievements in like less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, I know they had one because
the Game Boy Advance one is supposed to be okay.
I think I had the one for the Game Boy Advance or Game Boy DS, and that was what actually got me into the show. So like that was fine, but they have yet to have a really good Last Airbender game.
I suppose a lot of properties have that you could say about them. Like, has there ever been a really great Shrek game?
We're about to get the Power Wash Simulator DLC for Shrek, so...
Oh, there you go. How weird is that might be the best Shrek game? The best Shrek game is Power Washer Shrek. Like, who saw that one coming?
Look, it will only be the best if, after you finish cleaning everything, Shrek bursts in and yells at you, "What are you doing in my swamp?"
I feel like it should be the opposite. Rather than cleaning it, you should be dirtying an already clean location, even if it is the antithesis of Power Wash.
Well, aren't you? You are like making it like with rainbows or something.
I think it's like donkeying through a party, and so there's like rainbow stuff everywhere that you're cleaning up.
Okay, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. So they did actually lean into like the mythology of it to make some sense. I
Yeah,
suppose.
you're not just cleaning the swamp for the
Sake of cleaning a swamp.
yeah.
right.
You're getting the swamp back to its normal amount of dirty.
But yes, check in to playingforpets.com next Thursday and Friday, November 7th and 8th, 10 to 6. We will be playing all sorts of different games. Probably some games that I haven't even figured out yet will end up on the list. And it always ends up like kind of a surprise because there's not a set schedule. So we kind of play it by ear. And so, and sometimes the games that people end up playing are always a surprise. I remember one time we had an engineering professor and there was a bomb defusal game. And I gave it to him because I was like, well, he's an electrical engineering professor. Here's an entire game about electrical engineering. And he loved that game. And like he played a substantial amount of it, like got really into it. And it was a guy who, like, as far as I know, never played video games on a regular, not on a regular basis. Not that he never touched one. But like he got really into that game and really enjoyed it. And so those are always kind of the fun things. Like,
Well, didn't we have that last time? Sandy was the chair of our department at the time, and so she poked her head in to the last one here and was like, oh my gosh, this is so fun. And like, she does not think of herself as a gamer at all, but
right. She played the game.
Overcooked?
I think it was, I thought she played Moving Out. Maybe
could
she
have been.
played
She might play
Overcooked.
both.
But anyways, yeah, I know at the end of it was like, what is that game's name? Is that available on Switch? My daughter has a Switch. Can I go buy that game? And I was like, yes, you actually you can. So we'll be doing that. There's some other things we might do. We do have the capability of doing VR, so that might be something that we do as part of it. So we'll try to come up with some fun stuff. But playingforpets.com. We'll probably promote that. But because of that, there won't be an episode next week because we'll all be doing that instead of able to record. So all that business out of the way, why don't we move into what we've been playing? Alicia, what have you been playing?
I've been playing a bit more of the Super Mario Party Jamboree game. I honestly enjoy. I finally did like the story mode, quote unquote. I think I'm like halfway through that right now, and that's honestly pretty fun. Essentially, because Kamek is the one who's running the Mario Party this time, and so you're like helping him and the Toads set up the party. So you go to each board and you're doing different tasks, like gather wood for this Goomba or whatever. But then you also get to play all the mini games at various points in the board. The one Koopa will be like, I'm scared of boulders when this volcano explodes. Like, can you show me how to run away from boulders? And you have the Indiana Jones one where you're running away from the boulder. So that's been pretty fun. Like I said, I'm probably like halfway through that right now. Hopefully next week is very busy for me, but hopefully the week after I'll have time to jump back to that. And it's nice because like when I just did a party round on each of the boards, I just played 10 turns, so like not a lot of time to really play with the mechanics of each board.
Though 10 turns can take quite a while in a Mario Party game.
Yeah. And the 10 turns was fine for for like the Goomba's Volcano Island and whatever the other one is, but like the shopping mall one and the racetrack, 10 turns was not enough for that.
Right. I think now like the maximum is 30 turns that you can do.
I think so.
Because at one point it was 50 turns, and I think finally Nintendo realized that was insane, and people were killing themselves trying to do that.
Yeah.
Play Mario Party for that length of a time period. It's cool to hear you like it though and everything, because I feel like that game has gotten a lot of positive reviews, but then there's also been some really negative reviews, and so I never know like I never know how people are actually responding to a Mario Party game because I feel like those games are very divisive sometimes in the way people react to them.
Yeah, people either love them or hate them. I feel like I'm on the love them track for this one.
Good. That's good to hear. Because that I imagine that's a really hard game to make. Like it seems really simple, but then you play any off-brand Mario Party game, and you realize very quickly, like, no, Nintendo is doing so much better at this than anyone else is doing.
Yeah.
Speaking of playing for pets, there might be an off-brand Mario Party game.
I actually genuinely did think about buying a physical copy to bring to playing to pets, and then I was like, no, I'm just gonna buy a digital one, and then I can play it without having to worry about the cartridge.
Right. Switch is a platform where digital makes an awful lot of sense because just the convenience of not having to carry around multiple different cards.
Yeah, and I'm mostly a physical game girly. I don't typically like digital games, but having the Ace Attorney games all be digital only is kind of converting me.
Yeah, I made that transition. I feel like I started to make that transition in the PlayStation 3 era. And then really in the PlayStation 4 era, I just leaned heavily into, all right, I'm just going to buy everything digitally. And it is convenient, right? There are drawbacks to it, but like as a purely convenience, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely games like the Pokemon games, I would still want to get physical rather than digital because I'm more concerned about like maintaining my progress in those versus something like this where I'm like, if I can get it digital, if something happens and, they take it away and then they bring it back or whatever, like how much do I really care if I lose my progress on Super Mario Party Jamboree?
Right. I always think of it from the perspective of, like I like the preservation of games, but also there's part of me that looks at it as, well, I don't own I don't own my PlayStation 2 anymore, right? Mm-hmm. So like, why would it matter if I still own those games physically? Because I don't own the system anymore. And am I really going to be that person who has all these games like crated up in boxes and everything? It's actually much more convenient to have them all digitally. And now that all these consoles are backwards compatible, like I can just pull that game at any time, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's a game from 3 generations ago, which with the Xbox might be the situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, I certainly understand the other perspective on that. That's one of those issues where I'm like, we don't have to be militant over it. People can have their different desires on that one. All right, cool. So Super Mario Party Jamboree, anything else?
The other thing I've been playing, so the Pokemon trading card game Pocket app came out on Tuesday night, and it has been taking over my life ever since. This, and I think I talked about this when they first announced it, of how excited I was, because, I grew up collecting Pokemon cards and having no clue how to play the game. Like, I've never been big on deck builder games. I think my sister and I tried to play TCG once and just had no clue what the heck we were doing. Mm-hmm. But so I was really excited for TCG Pocket to just be able to have those cards again and, have the artwork and have all of that. And now I'm learning competitive TCG because this game is taking over my life.
I found that surprising that you weren't into card games, given like as much as you are into Pokemon, as much as you are into comic books. And
yeah, I
feel like those were big areas of card games.
Yeah, I know. It's like I always collected the Pokemon cards, but I never... when it comes to card games, I'm like a classic deck of cards, solitaire, cribbage, that kind of stuff. But getting into like Pokemon TCG or like I've never played Magic the Gathering. I've never done any of that.
I do love the idea of I play the traditional stuff like cribbage, none of this weird stuff like Pokemon. where today I think cribbage is far more weird than Pokemon.
You think?
Oh, I think far more people play Pokemon or Magic than play cribbage today. Don't you?
Yeah, I would probably agree with that.
That's
it's
so bizarre to
maybe
me.
a generational thing.
That could be, because cribbage is so much part of my life because of my parents. But
I play spades with my friends that I went to high school with, because we played spades back in high school. But I feel like that's not a thing that happens as much to high school kids today. Maybe I'm wrong.
I imagine high school kids would probably be much more likely to get together to play a game of Magic than to play a game of any other card game.
Right. One of those card games.
Yeah.
Maybe not Magic.
Sure, yeah. And
maybe it's
insert your card game here.
Disney Lorcana or whatever it is.
Yeah. Odd.
I mean, it's odd to me. You saying it, verbalizing it is what made me think, oh, that's actually kind of odd because, I don't know if there's a lot of 18-year-olds who know cribbage.
No, we always bring a deck of cards and a little notebook and play cribbage whenever we go to restaurants and we're waiting for our food. So, squirrel. Anyways, but yeah, TCG Pocket is really good. It is. I do wish that it wasn't a 12-hour wait to be able to open another booster pack, but you get, I think they call them Wonder Hourglasses, and you get enough of them just from your daily check-ins that you can speed the time up to be able to open more booster packs faster. I think right now I have 180 some cards and only playing since it dropped on Tuesday night.
And this is on mobile phones?
Yes. Yeah, this is on mobile.
Okay. All right. I'm going to download this
Do
as
it.
we talk.
Yeah, and it's really nice, and even when I say I've never been into deck building games, I never even played Marvel Snap when you and OJ were playing that nonstop. I downloaded it, but I never played it.
Yeah, we never got you into it because Ryan, OJ, and I were all really into it. And we never could get you into our sickness.
Yeah, I was just oh, this is fun. I'll do it sometime. And then I just never did. But TCG Pocket, I'm okay, I get it. But then it's also nice for me, again, being someone who knows Pokemon pretty well but doesn't know deck building games. You can auto build your decks, so it'll throw them all together, and then you can go and make tweaks. So
sure,
that's been really nice because if it was just, I think I finally built a deck this morning, and it's when it's just me doing it, I throw in supporter cards that aren't applicable for the deck that I've built, or I just don't throw in any supporter cards, and it's all Pokemon, and then I'm at 10 HP and I don't have any potions.
Right. Well, I think, we talked a lot about that with Marvel Snap, that one of the reasons we all got into that game was it was so easy to get into, right? Not that it was an easy game. I think there's a lot of complexity to that game if you want to play at a high level, but they had streamlined that game so much to make it accessible to people who didn't play card games, right? Who didn't play Magic. And, we all talked about Magic is sort of overwhelming in a lot of ways to somebody who's new. And so hearing you talk about this sounds like they've done a good job with Pokemon of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Of making this very accessible to new players.
Yeah, definitely. Because even, like I said, as someone who's been a Pokemon fan from the very beginning and, has collected cards from the very beginning, and has never figured out TCG because it was overwhelming, when I was in elementary school and tried to figure it out. And the other thing, and I don't know if this is specific to the app or if regular TCG play is like this, but one of the things that I like about playing it on the app is you win the battle when you've knocked out 3 of your opponent's Pokemon.
Mm-hmm.
So like it doesn't drag on for an hour.
Right.
You know, you and if you knock out an EX card, that's worth 2 points. So like there's times where you can finish a match in there's like achievements for some of the AI battles of like finish the match in 14 turns or whatever the case may be, and it's actually achievable even for someone like me who's like, yeah, I know this, like I know the Pokemon, I know the type advantages, even the wackiness that the trading card game does slightly different because it has fewer types than the video games, but yeah, it feels very accessible and it's a lot of fun.
Well, I think that fast play is especially important when you're talking about a mobile version, right?
Yeah.
Like you want something that is, you're on a train ride, you can play, you know, you're waiting in the doctor's office, you can play. You don't want a MOBA where like it's going to take you over an hour to complete a game, right? Because that's just not how people play games on their phone.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Is that everything?
I think so. I might have played a little bit more of Investigations since last week. I honestly don't remember. But nothing new to say on that. I'm still on case 4, so nothing new to say there.
All right. Mario, how about you?
Yeah, haven't played a ton this week, but you know, still working my way through UFO 50. Played and beat a couple more of the games in there. I think I've run into, for the first time, a couple of the games that I'm not a big fan of. Not because they're bad games, they're just not for me. But still having a lot of fun with that. I've got a couple other friends who are playing, so, you know, we get to have all the fun conversation of like, oh, have you played this yet? Or have you played that yet? And I think that's a really great part of that game in general.
Are the games not for you because of like their genres that you don't generally like, or is it just the game itself? Something about it?
I think it has to do with the genre. They're very like tilt-inducing for me personally. Okay. The games are in the style, if you're familiar with like a Spanky's Quest or Bubble Bobble. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it is about those games, but yeah, they frustrate me to no end.
Well, I guess we know what somebody will be playing for pets.
And I think
all 100 levels of Bubble Bobble.
I've beaten Bubble Bobble. I've beaten all 100 levels of Bubble Bobble. I think the thing that particularly for those two, and I think it's more this than anything else, is they have hard game overs. So you might be 30, 40 levels into it and you have to restart from the beginning. And that just like Sisyphean experience of rolling the same ball up the mountain, which is weird because I enjoy speedrunning, but for that, I don't know what it is. It's very tilt-inducing.
But like that was common of games of that era.
Oh, so absolutely.
It's kind of appropriate, but yeah, also incredibly frustrating. I mean, at the time it was frustrating, and especially now to go back to those games is often infuriating.
Yeah, and I will say, like, this is not a sentiment of the games themselves are bad or they're poorly made. This is purely a mad because bad situation where I am just not good at them. And so that's what makes them more frustrating. In many ways, I don't think I've experienced or played one of the games that I'm like, ugh, yikes, this isn't great. All the games that I've played, like 16 or 17 of them, they're all still like incredibly well made. I think it's like, it's weird to call it like my game of the year because it's like 50 games, but it's very high on my list in terms of game of the year.
And I think it's especially kind of weird to think of it because it's sort of, it's sort of a riff on those old 50-in-1 carts that used to get sold, right? So like back on the NES and the Super Nintendo and Genesis, there would be these like 30 games in one cart.
Yeah.
And the games were always garbage on those, right? They were these games made by like sort of like copying different genres. So there'd be a racing game, but it was a terrible racing game. And to have them make a sort of game emulating that in style at least, and it actually be really fantastic, the games, right? It sort of messes with your head, especially if you grew up during that era and like seeing it and being like, oh, well, no, these are actually good games. This isn't a goof.
Yeah, it's one of those things that part of me is like, if I were to include it as a whole, which is probably fair, it, in my opinion, should probably be the game of the year. But I think there's also a very reasonable conversation where I'm just like, no, this one of the 50
Right.
in and of itself deserves to be on a game of the year list.
Right.
Which I think is a really impressive feat of like the developers. And I love seeing how they are pulling from like the styles in the game of the time. Like the most recent one that I played that I beat yesterday, it is essentially super off-road in like the way that you go about playing it and the way that it controls, and it's great and it's a ton of fun. And so and the fact that it's like, I think it's $25, but it is very much worth $25. I'd say if that does feel a little high, put it on a wish list, wait for it to go on sale on Steam. I'm sure it will at some point. But that's a game I couldn't recommend enough to people, especially people who just enjoy games or played games in that era.
Yeah, I haven't gotten around to it yet, but that's a game I really want to play. Like, and I think part of the reason I haven't gotten around to it is I know once I start playing that, I'm going to be fully immersed in it.
Yeah.
Playing through those 50 games, like maybe not, beating all 50 of them, but at least devoting a significant amount of time so that you get that full experience from each game.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can totally put a ton of time into it. I think I'm at probably about somewhere between 30 and 35 hours that I've put into, like I said, the 16 or 17 games that I've played thus far.
So less than halfway through and you're already at 30 hours for a $25 purchase is pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'd say there are some games that are very fast, but in most cases, you're probably going to put it at the very least an hour or two into most of them. Some of them absolutely longer. I think up to this point, the one I've put the most amount of time into has maybe been 6 or 7 hours into one of those 15 or 16. But yeah, it's in my opinion totally worth it if people have, or if it sounds interesting or intriguing to people.
And there's supposedly a role-playing game in there that itself is like 20 to 30 hours.
Yeah, I don't know. I think one of the times I saw somebody post about it online, they said they beat it in like 13. So maybe like 20 to 30 hours is if you're like trying to fully complete the game. But even so, like 13 hours.
That's
like,
a lot
that's
for a 50 pack, especially.
for an indie RPG. That's a game in and of itself.
Yeah.
I mean,
Right.
I don't know how long like Sea of Stars took people, but maybe more than 13 hours. But like, that's essentially what is in this pack. Obviously, far scaled down because they're trying to make games that would be from that era in terms of like the development limitations. But that's what you're looking at.
Well, I mean, 13 hours for $25 is, to me, like financially worth it on its own.
Absolutely.
Right? If I can spend $25 and get 13 hours out of it, like, that's a worthwhile experience. I've spent more money for games that were shorter.
Yeah. And then you have 49 more games to play on top of it.
I'll say that's why I was saying, like $25 for 50 games. That's 50 cents a game.
Yeah. And I think what makes it so much fun to, I have typically not been the person where it's like, oh, I need to get this game when it first comes out so I can be part of the conversation that's happening online. And I'm still not doing that. I'm mostly just doing it with friends. But I think the one thing that's very cool to see, especially on like the UFO 50 subreddit, is people are making like their tier list of the games, and to see the variety of like certain people really like this and other people really like that. It has such a variety in terms of the genres that are available to you that there's going to be something for pretty much everybody in it.
And I think that's an interesting reflection of that time in games versus, say, today, where like at that time you really, you go back to the NES, there really are that many variety of games, right? Like all sorts of like just weird experimental things, because the time it took to develop a game and the cost involved were so small, you could kind of just go do something. And that's weird. Like you could have, make a game of Jaws, right? Where you're like having to like shoot Jaws with a harpoon and then drive your little boat around. And that could be a full experience. Whereas today, these companies have to place such big bets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't be as experimental. Like, I mean, you still see that with indie games, right? But like the big AAA publishers, you don't see that nearly as much. So in some ways, that's kind of reflective because when you talk to people about the NES or the Super Nintendo, you hear a lot of variety in what those top 10 games might be for each person. There's a few that will carry over, but then they get pretty varied very quickly. And I feel like today, like if you talk to people, what are the best games on the PlayStation 5? Like it's going to be it's going to be 7 or 8 of the same top 10 games.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not nearly the chance at variety anymore.
Absolutely. So yeah, spending a lot of time with that. I'll probably continue to talk about it in future episodes as well as I continue to work through it. The other thing that I played though, which is in some ways, I guess, similar, was some friends and I, for the first time, played with the Shuffler. That is an extension made for the BizHawk emulator. And basically what that is it's like a script that somebody wrote for BizHawk that creates a folder that you can put games into, and then once you run the script, it will shuffle between those games at different intervals of time. So like we did it with 4 games. We did it with 4 N64 games of Chameleon Twist, Ocarina of Time, Cruisin' USA, and something else. Dual Heroes is a fighting game. And so for every 15 to 45 seconds, it would randomly shuffle between those 4 games. And so that's what we did last weekend. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. I think I've played all 4 of those games before. So it didn't take too long, but yeah, it was a good time. It was definitely interesting. It's one that I've seen a lot of people play with and mess around with, but hadn't done myself. And so yeah, it was fun.
That reminds me of there's a game called Multi Bowl, which somebody took a bunch of arcade games and like built kind of a software wrapper that does something very similar. And Multi Bowl's kind of older before like this got built into emulators and everything, but that's a unique experience, and it sounds really cool that that's getting built into emulators now, where that can just be done. Because again, like there's a lot of games, like I know you play with a group of friends and everything streaming, and there's a lot of games like that where you don't necessarily want to play that game from beginning to end. Right? Like, I mean, I don't know what your experience with Chameleon Twist is, but like, Chameleon Twist is not a game I ever think of, I want to sit down and play some Chameleon Twist again. And, but like in that sort of format, it would be a lot of fun. Like, okay, I'm going to play a couple of minutes of Chameleon Twist.
Yeah. Well, so the way that we did it was we didn't complete Ocarina of Time because that would be so much longer, but we found like a solid 40-minute, hour-long goal for Ocarina of Time. And so it will continue to shuffle between those 4 until you click out of it. Obviously, you don't have to finish if you don't want to. But I think I finished all 4 games. It took like maybe 2 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. But yeah, it makes for this really interesting thing, especially because there's a range of when the swap happens. If every swap happened at 30 seconds or 45 seconds, you would like start to like track that. But when one of them takes 20 seconds and the next one is at 40 seconds and the next one is at 32 seconds, you're in the middle of a game and it swaps on you. And if it swaps into cruising, you might be taking a hard left turn depending on, what you're doing. And so there's like that readjustment, and it creates just like this very fun, very silly play experience where you don't know what's about to happen next. You're in the middle of jumping a platform and it gets swapped on you. You're like, well, when it gets swapped back to that game, we'll see what happens. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. And it's something I'd plan on doing some more stuff with in the near future.
Cool. That sounds very neat. Anything else?
Nope, that's about it.
All right. Well, let's see. For me this week, I haven't had a whole lot of time because I've been working on Playing for Pets. So generally when I wasn't working, I was or doing something else. I was doing that. So not a whole lot of video game playing, but they did put out Call of Duty Black Ops 6, which it seems insane that we're at Black Ops 6 already.
Yeah.
I like the Call of Duty games. I like to play the campaign. I've never been somebody who played an awful lot of the multiplayer. This is the first game that they're releasing on Game Pass on day one, on launch day. So I have Game Pass, so it was free for me to download and try this. So I did download it. Okay, so I need to talk about the experience of downloading and playing this game because it is a mess. So first of all, you choose what you want to download. So you choose, do you want to download the campaign or the multiplayer or Warzone or zombies mode? So that's good. So you're not necessarily downloading the full 150 gigabytes whatever that game is up to at this point.
Those games are so big.
Yeah.
They take forever to download.
So like for me, I don't really care for zombies mode, and I don't really play a lot of the multiplayer. I'm not going to play Warzone. So I just didn't download any of those. I was like, give me the campaign. That's all I'm really interested in. Mm-hmm. So it downloads that. That still takes forever. But then it gets downloaded. Then you load it up. And over the last few years, they've transitioned the Call of Duty games. Instead of being single launcher games each year, they have this multi-launcher that they have built as sort of wrapper for all the Call of Duty games. So when you load that up, it takes you to a menu where it says, what do you want to play? Do you want to play Warzone? Do you want to play Call of Duty Black Ops 6? Do you want to play Modern Warfare 3? Like, what game are you wanting to play? So this is after you've already selected. I'm playing it on PC through the Xbox Game Pass app. So this is after you've chosen the game and launched it yourself. You are put into a menu where you then have to re-choose the game that you chose to play. But when you load that launcher up, it has updates to make. Mm-hmm. Those updates aren't downloaded when you download the game. So you have to load the launcher, then it's going to load those updates. In order to install those updates, it has to restart the launcher. So then it restarts the launcher on you. Okay, so now it takes a while for this launcher to launch. You have to relaunch it. Takes a while again. Okay, now I'm at the menu. I can select Call of Duty Black Ops 6. I select it. It then loads the actual game, right? But then there's updates for that. So now it has to restart this over again. Kicks me back out, has to start the launcher again in order for me to select this again after it's installed these updates. So then I get into that. I select Black Ops 6. Then that gives me another menu where it says, do you want to play Warzone, zombies, multiplayer? I'm like, okay, yeah, I want to play campaign. I select that. It finally gets me into the game. Mm-hmm. But like the process of starting this game is the most arduous process of playing a game I've had in a very long time, to the point where by the time I finally got into the game, it was almost like, well, I'm like, my time here is done. Like, I'm not that interested in continuing to play this. So then it finally gets you into the game. And, you know, I think everybody's familiar with the campaign mode from Call of Duty games. They are big, dumb action movies. They are like Michael Bay style, big, dumb action movies. You know, like, think the Rock era of Michael Bay is what you're playing. So this one is set during the first Gulf War. and you are CIA agents. And very quickly, like this isn't a spoiler, it's like in the first mission, but very quickly you find out that there's some paramilitary organization that's working counter to you, and they might be like run by somebody secretly in the government. And so like, you're in these big action scenes where you're in a Jeep driving through the desert, and there's helicopters after you firing rockets at you, and you're having to use a rocket launcher to take the helicopter out. And so it does all of that, big action start. And then it very quickly like becomes sort of a Mission Impossible movie where you and these other CIA agents are on your own, like setting off on this mission where you're like kind of working against the regular CIA because they might be corrupt with like, people who have like penetrated and working nefariously against the U.S. government.
It's a double agent.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've watched those movies, right? Like, I feel like every Mission Impossible movie has the same setup these days. Like, we are disavowing you. Like, you, Tom Cruise, must go off on your own.
Hey, the formula works.
I mean, those movies are wildly entertaining, right? Like, I feel like by the time they got to part 4 of that, they had nailed the formula, and every film since then has been the same, but also wildly entertaining. I do not knock those films.
No, I have, yeah.
But anyway, so the thing that I think is kind of interesting as that series has evolved is when you go back to, say, the modern era of Call of Duty games, which I always say start like Modern Warfare, right? When they did that first Modern Warfare game, the original Modern Warfare, that still felt like a traditional first-person shooter of you progress through the level, and yes, there are cinematic moments and everything, but like it felt very much like a traditional first-person shooter. These games, the gameplay level to level is much more varied than it traditionally was. It's much more of, hey, here's this building. Figure out a way to get into this building. You have multiple different entryways to get in here. It is much more of, hey, this is a stealth level. You need to sneak into this church, and you can go guns blazing, but you can also kind of sneak your way around with a silenced pistol and take out the different guys. And to me, that's like, that makes those games much more interesting than if they had just stuck to the traditional route. So I've been enjoying it. Between levels, you have a safe house, and you go there between every level, and you interact with other characters. You can like walk around this safe house and talk to the different characters. And so there's some neat kind of interactive dialogue there. You get different dialogue choices. But then you also have the ability you're collecting cash in the levels. And so you're like collecting this cash, and then you're spending it in those segments, like upgrading your base. And as you upgrade your base, you get new options to upgrade your character. So it's stuff like you have more steady hands so that when you're firing, there's like less recoil on the guns. And, you can snap to looking down the sights of the gun much more quickly if you like do this upgrade. So that adds, this like very minor RPG element to the game as you're upgrading. And that's neat. I will say, I feel like I at times just want to get on to the next level. I don't want to walk around talking to everyone, having these conversations. Mostly because I feel like I don't care a whole lot about the story.
Yeah.
Even though I think it's interesting that they're doing something cool with the story, it's just, I've played 100 games with this kind of a story, right? Like,
yeah, I'll say I guarantee you one of those people is the double agent, and I've not even glanced at this game.
Well, I mean, it's right. It's like by the time you got to the 3rd or 4th season of the series 24, and you're like, yeah, I know the formula. I know how this is going to play out. I just want to watch Jack Bauer like be cool. Like I don't care anything about the story because I know there's going to be a mole in CTU, and I know like the mole is going to do something horrible, and Jack is going to get pushed to the edge again. And I feel like that's the way this game feels an awful lot of the time. But like I'm enjoying it. They make those games extremely well. I cannot say really a negative thing about it from that perspective. I have not, again, played multiplayer zombies. If that's more your thing, I can't report on how good those are. I can tell you, like, I just never like zombies. Like, it's never something that appeals to me. The multiplayer I've heard good word about, so yeah, take that for what it is. But yeah, that's it for me. So let's move on to the news. Let's see. Nintendo has launched a Nintendo Music app for your cell phone. And if you have a Switch Online subscription, so if you have the subscription to play games online, you get this free. You do have to log in to your subscription. But this lets you play games from throughout Nintendo's back catalog. It's sort of a limited catalog right now, but they do claim they will be adding more games as it goes along. And, you know, like Alicia, you pointed out when we were talking about this in the chat, that this is something that has been inaccessible in a lot of cases, that this is not something you could go on Spotify or Apple Music and play Nintendo music. It just was not available there.
Yeah, they've spent years just any time that someone uploads tracks from Nintendo games, everyone's always like, okay, you're going to get copyright struck pretty quick here. So it is nice to have, especially like, as you know, I listen to video game music nonstop. You know, I'll listen to it while I'm doing my homework. I'll listen to it while I'm like doing the dishes or whatever. And inevitably my favorite playlists get deleted because Nintendo copyright struck them. So I am pretty excited about this. I do kind of hate that there's not a free version where like you have to have a Switch Online subscription, but I am excited that this is a thing. I would also hope like at some point that they make a web version. That way I don't have to have my phone out to listen to the music, because I'm not a big fan of like when I'm working on my computer listening to my phone. I'd rather just listen to my computer. So I hope that they make a web version at some point, and you know, I'm looking forward to what they keep adding. Of course, now I'm trying to find it because I didn't download it earlier and I'm not finding it on the App Store. So that's
You might have to search for Nintendo and then go to all the apps that they have. Like,
that could be.
when you search Nintendo Music, it sometimes doesn't show up.
Yeah. Okay, yep, here it is.
But
I was going to say, because it was coming up with Nintendo Switch Online, and I'm like, wait, there's a mobile app version of that? But
yeah, so let's see if this works. I'm going to do a little test to see if this will play. And oh, okay, yeah, it's not. So we don't get copyright striked.
yeah.
I'm going to take that off and everything. But yes, they do have the most important Nintendo music. The Wii Shop channel music is on there.
That just brought me way back. But yeah, and like they have like Donkey Kong Country on here. They have, you know, Animal Crossing New Horizons. So they've got some older stuff on here as well already. I haven't. I mean, I literally just downloaded the app, so I'm not.
They have stuff from like the NES, Super Nintendo, like basically throughout their entire history, but it's very sporadic.
They have Nintendogs. That's all that matters. They have Nintendogs.
But it's a neat little app. I mean, it's an app I like quite a bit. But I think the issue is, right, like, how often am I going to use this? Because, you know, when I'm playing music, I'm using the Apple Music app. Am I going to switch over to this separate app? Am I just going to forget that this exists? Even though it's neat to be able to listen to some of this when I want to.
And see, I'm like, I will totally use this. But again, I do think I would use a web version more than an app. So I would hope that they expand it to a web version at some point.
I would say normally they absolutely will, but it is Nintendo. So
Yeah.
I think they absolutely will not.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is, this came out of kind of nowhere. Like this announcement, they just
It was very random.
Yeah, and so this is after Alarmo. This is Nintendo. The prevailing kind of idea online has been Nintendo is doing everything they can not to announce the Switch 2.
Yeah.
They're announcing every oddball project that they have ever thought up of. They're like, what if we made an alarm clock? If we make an alarm clock, we don't have to announce the Switch 2. What if we make a music app? Like, we don't make apps hardly ever anymore, but like we'll make this one and put it out. And, it is a great sort of value add to that Switch online subscription. Like, this is not what you would subscribe for by itself, but if you're already subscribing to that makes this just that much more worthwhile. You're subscribing to play games online, you're getting the virtual, console catalog, and now you're getting this. And I think for a lot of people, that's a pretty good value at $20 a year.
Yeah.
All right. So that's some kind of happy news, if not a little weird because it's Nintendo.
Happy and weird, the Nintendo tagline.
Yeah. But meanwhile, some less happy news. Sony has closed down Firewalk Studio. This is the developer of Concord. If you remember, Concord is the game that they released a couple of months ago. And then 2 weeks after they released it, they unreleased it and offered everyone who had purchased the game a rebate on it. And they have now shut down the studio. At the time when they announced the game getting pulled, they said, hey, we're going to go back and reconsider and think about this game. Apparently they did, and they decided that they no longer want it to be in the Concord business. So they have shuttered the game. They are not doing anything further with Concord. They have also shuttered the studio, Firewalk, that was behind developing this.
That's just such a bummer that like this,
That's sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
it's just like the developer doesn't even get a chance to do something. Their game got shut down in 2 weeks, and then now the developer's completely shuttered. So like, well, crap. Now what?
Yeah, well, I should say that as part of this, they announced that they would try to find positions within their other studios for a lot of these employees. How successful that is, right? And like how many of those employees find jobs. And, the thing also is a lot of these studios are working remotely. So like if you're a Sony studio in Seattle, right? Like I don't know where Firewalk is, but like if you're located in Seattle, they do have studios in San Diego, but that's a pretty big move for people to make.
Yeah.
So even if they offer you a job, it doesn't mean it's a job that you can or will want to take.
Yeah. Mario, you were about to say something?
Oh, I think the same thing. It seems like such a major step to go from, promoting this game and having this game to shutting it down in 2 weeks and closing the entire studio. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but I'm also not a business person.
Yeah, but it definitely feels like you said, it feels like a leap. And it's like, was something going on behind the scenes there that y'all are shutting this down so fast? Like what?
There
happened?
There were stories coming out of that studio that studio suffered from toxic positivity. And that there were people working on that game who had raised concerns, and those concerns were sort of dismissed internally. And, like those are rumors, right, coming out. This is people's opinion of how they viewed it. So like maybe the studio was so fundamentally flawed, there was like no saving it. You know, this isn't the case of you make Hi-Fi Rush a beloved game and then you get shut down. This was a game that was a failure, but like as we talked about, it wasn't a game that was a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Like it didn't find its audience, but like everybody who played that game was like, well, it's well made.
Yeah.
It's not like this is a complete train wreck of a game, you know? So yeah, it's a shame. It's always a shame when people lose jobs, right? Like there's nothing. It's weird to read people on social media like celebrating when a studio gets shut down. There's such a like there's such a sleazy shitheadness to that.
I'm like, in who I just want to talk, and if I have a chair in my hands, that's irrelevant.
You've been very like WWE coded this week, haven't you? You want to take everybody on with a steel chair.
It's not just me.
There's one right in the corner of the room that I've stared at for the last 2.5 years.
Thought she was talking about me as a person who is across the corner from her. No, there's a chair over there.
There's somebody in this room I've been thinking about hitting with a chair for 2 years.
Now we're getting into OJ and Ryan territory.
Look, Ryan needed that chair for protection from OJ.
I don't know. That was OJ's old spot that the chair is in. I'm just saying.
True. So speaking of Black Ops 6, it had the biggest Call of Duty release ever. So the highest number of day one players. It had the highest number of Game Pass ads ever on launch day. So the number of people who signed up for Game Pass on its launch day was the highest number Game Pass has ever had. And the unit sales on PlayStation and Steam were up over 60% year over year. So sales of the game on those other platforms. So like, let's look at this collectively. So the game is huge on Game Pass. That seemed like a given. Like that's not surprising. A lot of people playing it day one. The fact that it translate it to more people signing up for Game Pass, right? Like that's the whole reason you buy Activision if you're Microsoft. So that seems like a success from that perspective. The fact that sales on PlayStation and Steam increased this year with this launching concurrently on Game Pass means that Game Pass did not cannibalize all those sales.
Yeah.
That those people didn't go, well, we'll just buy this on Xbox, right? And certainly people on PC could have not bought this on Steam and just signed up for Game Pass instead. I mean, that's what I'm doing. I'm playing it on PC, but using Game Pass. So, you know, granted, last year's Call of Duty was one of the less liked ones in recent years. So it's not surprising that the sales might be higher, but 60% is significant.
Yeah, that's a big jump.
So this seems like a big success for Microsoft. Like this is why you spend $70 billion buying Activision. Because this is like doing all the things that you want to do. It's selling well, like in units, so you're making a lot of money that way, but it's also increasing Game Pass subscriptions, you know, and it's having its biggest launch day. So you didn't buy a dying product, which I think is always the worry when companies go out and spend a lot of money. They're buying something that is on a downward trajectory instead of on still that upward trajectory. It seems like Call of Duty still has a lot of life in it as a franchise, which I guess depending on like what you think of video games could be a good thing or a bad thing from your perspective.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm like remembering when Call of Duty 3 dropped and like half the school was not in school that day because they all stayed home to play the game. And I'm like, I wonder how many people took off work and how many people took off school for this.
Right. Yeah. I did not take off work, but I did spend some time over the weekend playing it. Let's see. As part of this, Activision has said that 15 different studios are currently working on the Call of Duty franchise. So to put that a little bit in perspective, of course, they're putting out, it seems like they're going to try to continue that new game every single year trajectory. So you probably have at least 3 different projects going on now for the next 3 years, right? It takes about 3 years to develop one of these games. So you have to have games at different development levels with different teams. So that's not 15 studios working on one game. That's probably 5 studios working on 3 different games each. And then these aren't necessarily like full studios for each of these. Some of these would almost assuredly be what they call support studios. So you might have a studio that is just making multiplayer levels or, just making graphics for the game and that sort of thing. While you have your main studio like Treyarch or whoever it is, making the full game itself. And so, when you see that number 15, it sounds like a lot. And then when you start putting it in that perspective, it still is a lot, but it's not as insane as it sounds on first blush, I don't think. But it does mean, they're still betting heavy on the Call of Duty franchise. Let's see. Former PlayStation executive Sean Layden has encouraged the industry. This comes out of an interview with him. He encouraged the industry to invest in more AA games. Quote, between Grand Theft Auto and Among Us. So I feel like this is something we've talked about that, you have your Spider-Man 2 where you're spending $300 million making this game. You have your Grand Theft Auto 6 where they are probably spending something equivalent to that, if not more money. And you have all these big, huge bets, and you don't have any of those kind of smaller games. And when you do get those smaller games like a Hi-Fi Rush or a Prince of Persia, that those games are often, they're seen as disappointments because they're not selling 20 million copies, right? Which seems kind of a crazy idea to begin with. Like, you should have known that Hi-Fi Rush is not going to sell 20 million copies. It's always been the sort of game that would sell maybe 3 million copies at the high end.
Yeah.
But he's saying, when we get into this era of spending this much money on these games, I think Layden's making the argument that they need more of these smaller bets because not every game can be that grand slam, right? Not every game can be the next Grand Theft Auto. You're going to end up with a lot of games that are Concord that or what was the Batman Arkham game that they released?
Oh,
not Gotham Knights, the Suicide Squad game.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, yeah.
So, right, where these games miss.
Yeah.
And there's going to be some of those, and you can't afford to have multiple of those misses in a row, or you end up in a situation like Ubisoft, right? Where Ubisoft puts out Star Wars Outlaws, and that misses. Well, you're losing a lot more money on Star Wars Outlaws than you are on something like Prince of Persia. And, that the industry should be betting more on, when we talk about A and AA and AAA, that's always about the cost of the game. So he's saying you need more of those mid-range cost games instead of everything being the biggest budget ever for a video game.
That just goes back to what we were just talking about with UFO 50, right? Like there aren't the opportunities for people to explore and try out new things and be innovative in like a major studio setting. Like you have to be independent to be able to do that and take those sorts of risks. Because if you've invested all of this money into it, it has to hit. So you have to follow whatever conventions already are out there.
Yeah. I'll say, I feel like we talk about this a lot too when we talk about how many PlayStation and Xbox games look the same.
Right.
Compared to indie games where you get unique visuals, you get unique gameplay, you get these, because exactly, it's like you have to put so much money in to make something because then it has to be a hit, and it's like I'm full agree with him here.
Well, I think, when you make a Spider-Man 2, are you going to be experimental with its art style?
Yeah.
Or are you going to try to make a hyper realistic looking game? And I think most of these studios, like, being experimental with art style is a gamble, is how they view it, right? Like, so you're going to go the hyper realistic route. And so that's part of the reason we end up with these games kind of all looking alike. They're all built using the same game engine, and they're all going for the same look at the end of the day. And so where we do get somebody that stands out, right, is Nintendo.
Mm-hmm.
Where even when Nintendo does make a game that plays similar to others in the genre, Nintendo puts a spin on it, and you get something like, Yoshi's Woolly World, where, okay, well, this isn't maybe the greatest platformer, but it has a distinct look to it that makes it stand out. And, we've talked about Nintendo has even gotten maybe a little less experimental. There's less new IP coming out of Nintendo over the lifetime of the Switch compared to previous consoles. But they have been very experimental within franchises. So we get an open world Zelda game, right? Or
an open world Kirby.
Well, a 3D Kirby, right?
3D,
like we get a 3D Kirby, which still in a lot of ways plays like a Kirby game, but is playing with the way that you play it, right? So yeah, Nintendo even is affected a little bit by this, though Nintendo does continue to make those kind of smaller games that they put out here and there. So yeah, let's see. EA is planning large systematic changes to Apex Legends to return it to growth. I feel like we've talked about this with games as a service, and talking about how not every game can be the biggest game in the world or keep that up over a long period of time. So you have stuff like Fortnite that continue to keep that up, but you have things like Apex Legends.
Through the Fortnitification of...
Right. But you have these games that hit real big like Apex Legends, and they're really popular for a while, and then they start hitting that downward trajectory with their player base. And we've talked about Apex Legends specifically with this, that it is on that downward trajectory. So this is them talking about, we are planning big changes to try to sort of recoup this. This was also as part of them saying, hey, we're not abandoning this. We're not making Apex Legends 2. We're working on this one, right? I think a lot of companies have kind of learned the lesson of don't scrap what already has the installed base, like try to recover that installed base in some way. Which some games have done successfully. World of Warcraft has done that very successfully in the last couple of years. But
I feel like World of Warcraft's done it a few times.
Right. There's been some ebbs and flows,
I
think, over the years with it, definitely. Let's see. Nintendo, speaking of other out of left field announcements, Nintendo just out of nowhere, just on social media announced, hey, we're porting Xenoblade Chronicles X. We're doing a remaster of it for the Switch. So now all the Xenoblade Chronicle games are available on the Switch. You can play the entire franchise on the Switch at this point. And this was the last one remaining. This was a Wii U game. And so they are finally porting it over. The only thing that's weird about this, I mean, this is great for people who like those games, and there's a huge fan base of those. But the only thing that struck me as weird was just this idea of, we're just going to put this out in a tweet. That we're not going to wait and include this as part of one of our shows or anything.
I'll say the fact that it was a tweet and not a Nintendo Direct, it's like, it comes back to what we were joking earlier about announcing Alarmo and announcing Nintendo Music. I'm like, is the next Direct going to be when we finally get the Switch 2 announcement? And you're just refusing to do one until you can make that announcement?
Yeah, I mean, there were rumors out right before this that Nintendo might be announcing the Switch 2, because it was apparently their investors meeting, their quarterly report. And so a lot of people thought, well, they might announce some details on the Switch as leading up to that. Nope. they announced a port of Xenoblade Chronicles X. I don't think anybody's upset about that, but it is part of Nintendo. Like, it almost seems at this point they're taunting and they're teasing their fans.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we've got a big announcement tomorrow. You should tune in. Oh, it's an alarm clock. Oh, no. Guys, we promise this time it's going to be really good. This is what you've been waiting for. It's a music app.
Yeah. I know, it's to the point where we're all just like, Nintendo is just trolling us. Just nonstop trolling this whole year.
Their next thing is going to be they're going to announce a Rickrolling game on us.
Nintendo Music suddenly only plays Never Gonna Give You Up and Sandstorm by Darude.
I mean, hey, you want to talk about something unexpected? It would be a remake or remaster of Wii Music. Like, if that became like the new thing that they put out, like that would be people's heads literally exploding on the internet.
That would be hilarious.
I would kind of like to see them do that. Let's see. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle includes a warning about Nazi imagery. All right, so I have the warning here. This is going to appear on screen when you start the game. I believe the first time you start it, it gives you this warning. Some people have been doing previews playing this game, so that's where this comes from. The warning says, the story and contents of this game are not intended to and should not be construed in any way to condone, glorify, or endorse the beliefs, ideologies, events, actions, persons, or behavior of the Nazi and fascist regimes, nor any other regimes, or to trivialize any war crimes, genocide, and other crimes against humanity. So this makes sense, right? Indiana Jones, his classic villains are the Nazis, so it makes sense that if they're going to be in the game, you'll have Nazi imagery in the game and everything. This game is being developed by Machine Games, who made the Wolfenstein games. They really lean heavily into that, particularly with Wolfenstein 2. That game came out following the 2016 election, but it came out with not enough time for them to have made that game in response to that election. And if you have not played that game, it is worth going to play, because that game is an alternate history of what if Germany had won World War II, and there are parts you're in a sort of like 1960s America, and there are Nazis and Klan members like walking up and down the streets of these small towns, and they are just like giving it to them. Just like the whole game is mocking and ridiculing these people as like how horrible they are, and like, you know, the ideal that these people are in Washington, D.C. giving Nazi speeches in Washington, D.C. And it felt like eerily prophetic for a game that had been in development that much time beforehand. And so I'm sure with this, they were like, oh no, we have a Disney property. We can't have any sort of question about what the message of this game is.
Yeah, well, and that's what's wild to me is I'm like, the fact that they the fact that they have to include this when we all know the Nazis are the bad guys in Indiana Jones, just like they are in real life. Indiana Jones is not any gray on whether the Nazis are good or bad. And I'm like, the fact that they have to put this because some moron would play the game and construe it in a way of like, go. Please don't take this audio clip out of context. Some moron would play it and construe it in a way of go Nazis would be.
I mean, that is going on the soundboard.
Please don't take that clip out of context.
Well, I mean, so when Wolfenstein 2 came out, there were advertisements for the game where they were like, hey, it's a great day to kill a Nazi, and like these sorts of lines. And there were responses on social media. Oh, you went and made this game political, and Like, why are you attacking beliefs different than yours, or something like that? They were like insane. Like, I have
Morons.
I have some of these like social media posts saved, and it's like, well, no, like Nazis are bad guys. Like, nobody should think the Nazis are good guys in any context. Like, this should not be a question or any confusion over this. But obviously, in the time since that game came out and today, they think there is confusion. They think there will be people who don't understand that the Nazis depicted in an Indiana Jones story are the bad guys.
And I hate that they're probably right. that some moron would be confused about this.
It's that Mitchell and Webb skit where, you know, the two German soldiers are going, "Are we the baddies?" Like, look at our hats. They have skulls on them. I don't think good guys usually have skulls on their uniforms.
It's just wild. We sure do live in a time.
Yeah, it's when I think it was reading that and I was like, it's a really nice statement. Like they've stated it very clearly, but it's also like, but like why? Like we shouldn't have to even put this on our game, but I guess, yeah, that's just what it is nowadays.
It's like they're probably smart to have done it, and I hate that.
I mean, I just think, like, I grew up when the Indiana Jones films were getting released originally, right? And I saw those films in theaters and, you know, the Blues Brothers when it was originally coming out. And those are films that are very anti-Nazi, and nobody questioned it. You never heard anybody go, you know, that movie Blues Brothers really hurts my feelings because they keep saying how much they hate Illinois Nazis. And I'm like, no, they're the good guys. You should hate Illinois Nazis or Indiana Nazis or Kentucky Nazis. You should hate them because they're the bad guys, right? And nobody questioned, like, you know, when you get to the end of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, like, nobody should be going, oh, that's really sad that the Nazis died at the end. Like, no, like, you're supposed to be happy. Like, that's the comeuppance at the end.
Yeah, and these are people that it's like, and it's not even like Indiana Jones is not interested in any potential gray area. It is just Nazis are the bad guys. And that's okay, because Nazis are bad people. And so, like, the fact that we have to say that an Indiana Jones game is not condoning, glorifying, or endorsing Nazis is just...
Yeah, the idea that anybody thinks a major video game company would make a game endorsing Nazis, right? Like that there's any sort of, you know, vagary there in the game. It's just kind of crazy.
Yeah. They're not going to come out and be like, the main Nazi was brainwashed and is actually a good person. No, he's just a Nazi. He's just evil.
Let's see. Monster Hunter Wilds is including an arachnophobia assistance mode that replaces the spiders and other insects with blob monsters.
Bless.
This is becoming a trend. They're not the first game to do this. Lots of games that feature spiders prominently are moving towards, like, well, how can we make the spiders less spidery and upsetting potentially to some people playing the game?
I don't remember if I talked about it on here, but the game Lethal Company has an arachnophobia mode, and the way that it replaces spiders is it's just the text spider on the screen that like chases after you.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful.
I don't know. That feels more like a nightmare. I mean, that's something we can laugh about and everything, but for people who suffer from this severely, I can see this being of use.
Oh, generally, I think it's very nice.
I'd say, as someone who's arachnophobic for multiple reasons, yes. Just bless arachnophobia assistance modes.
The U.S. Copyright Office has rejected libraries' push to allow remote access to games. So this was something that the Video Game History Foundation was part of this argument. They had went to the U.S. Copyright Office and said that libraries should be allowed to offer remote access to games. In other words, that you would be able to go onto a library's website and check out a digital file of a game in order to play it on your computer. So this has been one of the arguments for preservation of games, right? So like if you wanted to preserve the history of games, that you would be able to offer this as a service. The U.S. Copyright Office rejected this. If you remember, there was the Video Game History Foundation published the white paper that said, 70% of games over 10 years old are not available in any form or fashion anymore. So this was part of their research that they had paid for in order to make this case with the Copyright Office. And so this is the U.S. Copyright Office rejecting this and saying, obviously the ESA, the Electronic Software Association, counter-argued this and said, no, this will destroy our ability to, market these old games through things like compilations, Atari 50, that sort of thing. This seems like an antiquated idea.
Yeah. Emulator's going to keep on running.
Right. Like in a society where emulators exist, right, and games are easily accessible online, it seems like an antiquated ideal to not allow libraries to do this in a way that would be more organized and maybe as a way to to provide funding to those publishers of those games based on the popularity of how often this is getting checked out. I don't know how they would handle that and everything, but
it's like if a library is able to give out a digital copy for, checking it out, you as the company who owns that gave that library permission, so you have much more control of that than you do of, somebody emulating the game on their own.
Right.
So you'd think that they would think this was a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of delusion, right? Like you can control emulation and piracy.
Yeah.
Which the reality is, people have been emulating games easily since the 1990s. Like this is not going away. Mm-hmm. If anything, it's easier than ever before. Like you were talking about the BizHawk emulator, right? Like that makes emulating games easier than certainly it was 30 years ago to emulate them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of annoys me because, just let's talk from the academic perspective, right? Like one of the really cool things academically is that you can get books from almost any library. Video games are not accessible in that way. Mm-hmm. So if you're somebody doing research on video games, you are almost pushed into a situation where you have to use piracy, use emulators, if you're doing any game other than currently released games. Mm-hmm.
Which then, of course, there's a financial barrier too, if you're looking at currently released games.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, maybe you can find them at a library or something like that, but fairly rare.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not even like we have Blockbuster anymore to go and
right.
Blockbuster, you could pretty much guarantee was going to have a lot more games than libraries are kind of hit or miss on what games they have.
And a lot of them still don't have games.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's a fairly new idea for libraries to, curate a video game collection.
Within the last 5 years or so, I think, where it started becoming something that more libraries were doing.
Yeah, I mean, particularly I would say your local public library versus university libraries maybe were a little bit more progressive on that. But yeah, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, piracy will continue. All this is going to do is sort of drive that more underground and not allow this for convenience so that people can't, particularly from an academic perspective, so that scholars don't have access and can't talk about these games as straightforward as they would ideally want to. Let's see. Animal Crossing Pocket Camp is ending on November 29th. This is their mobile game that's available. So as part of this ending, they are going to put out a paid, quote unquote, complete version of the game, which you are going to be able to download for $10 until January 31st. And then after that, it'll go up to $20. So this is, I think, actually kind of cool. They are sunsetting a live service game, and their solution is, well, we're just going to take all the content, put it out as a complete package. You pay $10, you get the entire game. And so this game will carry on. You can continue playing this beyond, obviously its lifespan of being maintained by us. So it seems like a cool solution rather than the game just shutting down.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I checked this one out when it first came out. Never really played it much, but, for those people who are still very into it, who still have it, who still engage with it, yeah, I think that's great that there's going to be an option for those people to be able to persist in their playing of it.
And $10 seems like a reasonable price.
Yeah.
I also downloaded this when it first came out, played a little bit of it. It's not fantastic. It's certainly not a full Animal Crossing experience. But at $10, like if I had a kid and didn't want that kid to be constantly badgered with ads to like buy stuff and, here, buy 5,000 diamonds and $100 is your best deal. And like, I have friends who complain about that, and I often direct them to Apple Arcade because it doesn't have any of that in it. But like, this seems like, here's a Nintendo game. It doesn't have any of that sort of stuff. You just pay a one-time price. Your kid can play this game.
Well, and especially if you don't have a Switch and, don't have $70 to drop on whatever the Switch one was. It's like pretty much you're a lot more likely to have a smartphone than a Switch.
Right. And kids are definitely like, I feel like most people who have little kids have a tablet for their kid to play on.
Yeah.
Some form of tablet, whatever it is. So, it seems like a good solution. Last bit of news here, kind of negative news. Ubisoft, who would have thought, they have become our new Activision since Activision is gone. Ubisoft has to have bad news every week. So this was part of this was executives talking about kind of their downturn in sales, their kind of current problems. They, as part of this, hinted that anti-woke attacks on their games have hurt sales. So the executive committee is taking, quote, actions aimed at tackling the dynamics behind the polarized comments around Ubisoft so as to protect the group's reputation and maximize our game's sales potential. In other words, this is Ubisoft saying, hey, people threw a fit because we didn't make the female character in Star Wars Outlaws super sexy. And so we are going to make those characters super sexy from now on because people are having a heart attack online and calling us woke because we made a character that looked like an actual woman instead of a Victoria's Secret model. Great week, everyone.
Screaming. I hate the internet sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much this translates into lost sales.
Yeah.
Like every time I see one of these blow up, and we get a few of these a year these days where everybody gets all up in arms and they're like, oh, this game's gone woke. And it's like, is that really happening? Like, that accusation gets thrown against Marvel all the time. They just released the Agatha All Along series, which everybody who's watching that series that I've talked to absolutely adores it. And it stars only women. Like there's one male character in the entire series. And that male character is gay. And multiple of the women are gay. And like but like it's getting great critical reviews, it's getting great fan reviews. So like did those decisions hurt Marvel in any way? I'm sure there were people out there complaining, I don't want to watch a show about a bunch of women, but like it doesn't seem to have hurt Marvel in this case. I mean, it's arguable that it has hurt them before. The movie The Marvels probably was hurt by people being all mad about Brie Larson.
Well, and Star Wars fans are, I mean, we saw what happened to, and now I can't remember her name, but the woman who played Rose in The Last Jedi. Like,
right.
Star Wars fans can be very, but I think you're right that like it's hard to say how much of that is just online discourse and how much of that actually translates to finances.
Right. So like that was terrible for that actress, right? She got kind of pushed off social media because people were being
she was
extremely toxic to her.
Yeah.
And so like I don't mean to downplay that when I say does this matter?
Right, but does it I think like you said, does it matter financially? Is this actually translating to people not buying the game?
Right. Like, so did people who got mad about her in The Last Jedi, did they not go see The Rise of Skywalker because of that? Right? Like that's the question I have is does it actually translate into lower sales or less viewership or what have you?
Yeah. Or is it just people whining online and then going and seeing it because they're hate watching, buying a game to hate play it? Well, you're still making them. If you buy my game to hate play it, joke's on you. I still got your money.
Right. And I just don't know. Like, I mean, I certainly don't mean to trivialize the issues. I just don't know how much in lost sales it actually translates into. I feel like that Star Wars game, a much bigger issue is that game launched not on Steam. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that hurts sales. I feel like also people are kind of sick of the Ubisoft formula of open world and go here and you get more missions and stuff. Because, the people who actually played that game seem to have generally came away with it like, oh yeah, like after you get far enough into it, it's actually a pretty good game. Mm-hmm. So I just wonder with that. And I wonder, like, what does this mean? What does Ubisoft mean? Does this mean less people of color in their game? Does this mean less queer people in their game? What does this actually translate into this sort of language when they're like worried about anti-woke complaints?
Yeah, it's very legalese.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to say, "Hey, we're going to put less black people in our game." They're not going to say that, right? Like, there's somebody in PR going, "You can't say that."
Yeah.
But like, if that's the end effect, that's a problem.
Yeah.
I guess when I had read this, my hope, I did not interpret it that way. My hope was that it was going to be actions taken against people saying terrible things online. But unfortunately, that's probably less likely to happen than our games may feature less women or less people of color or whatever, because they have direct control over that.
Yeah. Oh, well, I feel like we get one of these stories every once in a while, and it's always kind of depressing. So let's end on a happier note. Let's talk about elections. And we're not going to talk about the election looming over the United States right now because there's nothing happy about that, at least like thinking about it in any direct way. So let's talk about something that's much happier. If you could vote for any video game character for president, which video game character would you vote for? Mario, who would you elect as our first video game president?
So I guess video game president, I kept thinking of like, who would I vote for U.S. president? I'm like, I don't know if this character is eligible to be the U.S. president.
They're not born in the United States.
Yeah,
They're
exactly.
not 35 or older.
Can a hedgehog be a president?
I love Mario, like how seriously you took this question.
But honestly, the way that I answered it, it really wouldn't have mattered. It would probably be like Kiryu from the Yakuza series. Seems to be a pretty like good dude.
I'm pretty sure he's not a U.S. citizen.
He is. Yeah, that's why. That was also the reason why I was like, I don't think he's eligible, but seems like a good dude. Stands up for what seems to be good morals, loyal to his people. I think those are qualities that people can respect.
All right. Can a hedgehog be president? I think we might find out here. Alicia, who would you vote for president?
I actually would probably vote for Sora from Kingdom Hearts. We were talking a little bit about Kingdom Hearts before the podcast, and that got me thinking about it. I'm like, Sora does a really good job of adapting to every new place he goes to. He's a respectful person. He's a good person who wants to do good things.
I mean, Kiryu does that too. He just does it with his fists.
More of a man of the people.
But it's like, you think about how many different cultures Sora has to adapt to. Every
True.
Disney movie having its own culture, plus all the different Final Fantasy games, plus he's going around with Donald and Goofy. So it's like, I feel like Sora would be the type of president that would actually do good things, not only for the country, but for the world.
Well, okay, so then I have to ask, who does he choose as his running mate, Donald or Goofy?
Oh, no, running mate has to be... Actually, I don't know if I want it to be Riku. I feel like the running mate should be King Mickey. I trust King... I don't trust the mouse, but I trust King Mickey.
You don't trust Donald or Goofy?
I mean, how many times is Donald supposed to heal me when he doesn't?
I feel like Tim Waltz has big Donald Duck energy.
Oh my gosh.
If you tell
I would trust Goofy more than Donald. Goofy nearly died for Sora in the first game. Donald can't even cast Curaga when I need him to.
Second game.
Second game? Was
game.
it the second game?
It was the second game.
Goofy.
And also, it's confirmed, Goofy definitely died in that game.
Goofy took a bullet for me, metaphorically.
Okay.
But Sora needs to be president.
All right.
I don't think I want Goofy or Donald running the country.
I would say Sora is also like non-American, so
He's also like 16.
Yeah. But I wasn't worried about the... Are they a U.S. citizen? Are they 35 or older?
Well, I made that a stipulation for this. You may not have
ignored
considered
it.
You know what, though? I went with a human being.
Kiryu's a human being. Wow.
No, but I'm saying against the hedgehog idea.
He's probably the most human being.
No, but I certainly don't want Sonic or Shadow to be president. That's asking for trouble.
What about
Knuckles?
Silver?
No.
Yeah, okay.
What about Knuckles?
No.
I feel like Knuckles should be like Secretary of Defense or
I was
something.
saying Knuckles would make a great cabinet member.
He would not. He is so freaking gullible.
Well, I mean,
Knuckles is the one who believes Dr. Eggman in every game.
You're thinking of like stupid Knuckles that we had from like for like a 4-year stretch. I'm thinking like badass Knuckles.
I'm thinking Idris Elba Knuckles.
Who, again, believes Dr. Eggman.
Well, but we haven't seen this new movie. Like, I feel like he will have, he's reformed by now. He's solidly Team Sonic.
He's still gullible. Otherwise, it's not Knuckles.
Okay, so my choice, who I am certain is old enough at this point, is Alucard from Castlevania.
Okay.
And here's my justification for Alucard. He has seen true evil, and he was born into true evil, and he turned his back on it. So we can trust Alucard. You can trust Alucard because Alucard, the easy route for him, right, is to just follow in his father's footsteps. But he rejected his father. He fought on the side of good. So I feel like, I can see the lawn signs right now. You can trust Alucard. And so
Who's his running mate?
I don't know, like Sophia or somebody. Sophia the witch from Castlevania 3.
Oh, Sypha?
Yeah. She seems like she would be like, she's a witch.
A witch and a vampire.
Look, they're as trustworthy as anyone.
I was going to say.
I would trust them more than some members of Congress.
I would vote for Alucard. He's not a U.S. citizen, but he's not born in the U.S., but I would vote for Alucard.
I mean, like it's hard to say with him. Like, I think he could he's so old, like who knows where he was born.
There's so part of that. How old is he?
His whole campaign is just a Jeff Foxworthy comedy routine.
And it doesn't, and that's the case. I mean, it's about as American as it gets.
Yeah. All the smear campaigns are just, but wait, when something goes wrong, is he going to go into another 300-year nap?
Look, he serves his 4-year term, and then he goes into a 300-year nap until we need him again. Then he can do his second term. I feel like he'll put us right back on the straight and narrow, and then he gets to take his nap. And then Simon Belmont can run. All right, that does it for this week's show. Thank you, as always, to Alicia and Mario. Thank you for those of you listening. Again, remember, no episode next week, but Thursday and Friday, tune in live to Playing for Pets. You can donate, do a lot of good for animals, cats and dogs at local no-kill animal shelter. But even if not that, right, just tune in, watch some fun people playing games. There's going to be some hopefully fun surprises, some things that will make Alicia happy. I've got this game. All it is you updating controllers. It's controller update simulator
2024.
Yeah, it's the new version.
Yeah,
I got a pre-release key. You're gonna love it. It has
the update for it.
Has all the newest controllers in it, so it'll be fantastic. We're gonna let her sit there and play that while we all go off into another room and play something fun. But that'll be a really fun time. It always is. And again, like I said, it's for a good cause. So tune into that. And then in a couple of weeks, we should be back with a new episode. Thanks again for listening. Have a great week. We'll be back soon.